Good morning and happy Thursday. We're doing this one day late for reasons that will soon become obvious. But before we do that, we should introduce ourselves. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Orca, and I am joined. Hey, you're not at home.
It's true. My wife had a series of Zooms she had to facilitate today. So it was either record this from my bedroom, which would have seemed weird talking to you, while sitting on my bed, or I could come into the studio. And I am back. It's Jordan Bateman, Vice President Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, and Maclean. Much celebration in the Bateman House last night as Reopen BC was open to the public.
Yeah, and that's, usually we tape these on Wednesdays, but it would have been silly, I think, to let a whole week go after the reopening announcement. What are your thoughts?
Well, I want to come back to the little piece of insight you gave me about timing. That to me seems probably that probably seems like the best place to start is, you mentioned there's obviously no plan is going to be perfect from the start. There's a lot of detail still lacking. Very clearly, the BC Teachers Federation were not consulted about what was being planned with for schools, even though school districts clearly were, as they were sending out callback notices to teachers to come on into the buildings and whatnot. So there's all of that that's kind of going on. My sense was that finally, and I found it a little cynical that by setting the actual date to reopen retail and whatnot to after the long weekend, that they're buying 2 more weeks of the lockdown. No one will really think about it much because, we're all preparing now for the 19th. But, truth be told, we are still technically locked down until then. And I was like, this is going to put us way behind everyone else as to when we're starting. You made the very valid point that you think this, the lack of detail could probably be traced back to them rushing to put this out as the public and our neighbors everywhere else started to turn towards reopening, and BC was clearly going to lag behind.
Yeah, in previous updates, Horgan had said that we should look at mid-May as a day when he would start to give details for reopening the province. And so that, in other words, that this announcement that happened yesterday would have come next week. Yeah. And if you look at the way the other provinces did their announcements, and I'm thinking of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, if they made the announcement on, let's say, a Thursday, that meant that the phase 1 of reopening started the following Monday. Here we have a week. It seems to me that there was a calculation made that there was going to be too much pressure to be seen to be this far behind the other provinces. And so they made the announcement maybe a week earlier than they wanted, but the plan is the reopening is going to start when it's going to start, when that's a week from now still.
Yeah. And, looking at the calendar, you're probably right. They probably thought they could make an announcement next week before the long weekend, and then have it come in the last week of May, maybe even as late as June 1st, which is a Monday. And it seems like a logical, if you're looking at a calendar from a purely bureaucratic point of view, that would seem like a logical point. So that is interesting that they would feel rushed. You had that point in your story from last week's John Horgan presser about, poll after poll says we shouldn't reopen too quickly. It was the first hint that anything other than science, as Adrian Dix likes to go. Actually, it was the second hint that anything other than science. The first hint that anything other than science were governing things was when Dr. Bonnie admitted that the 50-person cap and then the 10-person cap really didn't have any roots in science. It just seemed logical, which is different than science. That's fine. But poll after poll shows that the NDP were very, they're looking at places like Italy where during the actual crisis itself, the Prime Minister had very high ratings, and then it cratered immediately after because of how poorly the economic return has been handled. You can bet the NDP are terrified of that. So, having everywhere else in North America open and BC still locked down when we have the lowest rate of infection of all, that just was politically untenable.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. They are worried that, look, there will be some missteps. There will be some. I think the greatest government in the universe will probably get 1 or 2 things wrong in the days or weeks ahead, and maybe they won't even be intentionally wrong. It'll just be things that in hindsight that maybe we should have waited a week for this, or maybe this could have been opened earlier. And they know that in the moment, people are going to get frustrated. People are already frustrated. I've actually lost track how long we've been home. It's 7 weeks?
Yes.
At a certain point, I think a lot of people are starting to go a little twitchy and stir crazy. And they're starting to notice things that they think they could safely do. whether that's true or not, and maybe things that are starting to open in other places, other jurisdictions, and they're getting, I think understandably frustrated. And so I think, yeah, the government is worried about how they'll be perceived to handle returning. Because just because they have handled the restrictions relatively well, that doesn't mean that they'll be given a pass from here on till the next election.
Yeah, and bluntly, you look at Angus Reid put out a poll and showed like various premier approval ratings. They're all high, except for Jason Kenney, and I'd like to rant about the Alberta NDP someday. But when Legault in Quebec is at something like a 90% approval rating, and considering how badly things are going in that province compared to here, like these are artificial bubbles that can pop very quickly. Trudeau knows it. Horgan's been around the game long enough to know it. Dix is a political history guy. He knows it. So this is a fleeting moment, and they know that they have to actually win the recovery. The next election isn't going to be fought on how we handled this is day 53 of the shutdown. It's not going to be one on the 60 days of the shutdown. It's going to be one based on how the economy recovers after that. And if people are, if we're at a 15% unemployment rate still by next fall, if tourism still doesn't come back, if, we're still not allowed to wander around our province freely to go to our cabins, that they're going to, be looked upon. The NDP will pay the price at the polls. So
yeah. I mean, and you mentioned polls and the approval rating for the Premier of Quebec and things like that. It's important to notice to note, I think, rather, that polls. When you ask somebody, what is your opinion of the Premier of Quebec and his handling of the crisis, the answer they give you may not be the way they feel about that specifically. People are savvy enough to know that when they're being asked by a pollster, what do you think of the Premier and the government? A lot of the times, I think, especially right now, people are saying, you know what? I don't want an election. No, it's fine. It's fine for now. It's fine.
Yeah.
No election. Relax. Calm down.
It's all good.
And they may even be thinking in terms of things like, well, how do you think in terms of comparison with what's happening down south?
Yeah.
In which case, it's pretty good.
Yes. Well, I mean, like the man in the White House is the single biggest re-election tool for anyone in Canada. But the plan itself, there are some head-scratching things within it. There's some complete omissions. There's nothing in here about long-term care homes or, seeing relatives who have been locked away forever. Nothing about how to open up, even, socially distant visits with those people. Like that's a big flaw in this plan, because you have thousands of seniors and infirm people, my father-in-law included, locked away in these homes where we can't, we're doing Zoom calls, but for people whose cognitive functions are disassociated, it's not great. And these are folks who are living and dying alone, and that ain't great. And that's going to be part of the challenge going forward. Parks still seems really muddled in here. Nothing about swimming pools,
Schools was kind of the biggest point of confusion, I think, in terms of the way the reaction. The BCTF tweeted out almost, I don't want to say objections, but saying, "Whoa, that's wasn't our understanding." I think it was Rob Shaw of the Vancouver Sun. I don't remember exactly how he put it, but his takeaway was something like, "This was one of those briefings that seems reasonably clear when you're in the briefing, but then somebody asks you a real world question after the fact. Oh, great. When can I do X?" And there's a lot of those where the answer was, actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
They didn't get into that. You mentioned care home visits. That's a really good example. There's a few others like that.
I don't think they even know. Like Farney, Mike Farnworth, Solicitor General of this great province, the top cop, so to speak. He tweeted, he was giving me a little bit of sauce for calling it a cottage and not a cabin.
Oh, yeah.
And so I tweeted him back and was like, yeah, okay, point taken. It's a cabin in BC, you're right. We've been reading too much National Post, I guess, and Globe and Mail. But, while I have you, Farney, like long-term care homes, any discussion, like any hints of that, and just, radio silence. And I don't think he's being evasive with me. I just think he doesn't know and doesn't want to say anything.
Yeah, well, and I mean, not to defend him, because you raised a good point. It's not his ministry, but yeah, I mean, you're right. That was a really big and obvious gap, I think, for a lot of people. I had written about parks opening the day before, and the announcement was that, well, you'll get to go to parks for day use starting next week. But then you look at the park site, which I was doing literally just before we got on this call. they're not all reopening.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned
Some of them are.
Golden Years isn't reopening, which is a huge park for the Fraser Valley.
Yeah, Golden Years is not reopening. I will admit I was selfishly mostly looking at parks near me, but and there are an astonishing number of provincial parks and protected areas in this province, so it's a long list. But there's a significant number, not most, nowhere near most, but a significant number are not reopening next week, and it's because they don't think that social distancing can happen safely in those parks. Which, again, if you can open a daycare. Why?
You can limit.
I don't know the
all
answer.
these parks have gates. You can limit the number of people who come in. You can say, well, look, capacity on BC Day Long weekend, we usually allow 10,000 people in, but we're only going to allow 2,000. Oh, okay, great. People would at least understand that. But just to close them, like Golden Years is a massive park with dozens of places to access water. Like, you don't need to all be on the one public beach together. And there's no one camping. You could even open the campground beaches to folks. Like, there's plenty of space. Stuff like that.
The Juan de Fuca Park here on the island is much the same. I'm exaggerating, but it basically goes from Souk to Port Renfrew. It's just a massive, massive stretch of park and several really beautiful beaches that I guess we're not allowed to go to for reasons that I will admit I don't understand.
I'm hoping that maybe they just haven't updated the websites. But
I don't know. I mean, there are some stories out there that they have decided in some cases that some of these parks will not reopen for reasons, but there could be some that there are probably one or two that have been left closed in error on the site. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, look, Dr. Bonnie says spaces. Big spaces, few faces. Okay, well, we need the spaces to do that. The park closures have been bungled from the start by the province and the municipalities and the regional districts. Brad West today tweeted out that the Portcomb's going to reopen their parks, probably both of them. Just kidding. I'm sure there's more than two parks in Portcomb. Sorry, a little joke from the sunny side of the river at the other side. But look, Langley Township. So I'm like, great. Retweet that. Hey, come on, Langley Township, let's get going, because their park policy has been stupid and driven by the so-called COVID Karens and not by actually any science.
Karens.
We're looking at it carefully. No, quit looking at it carefully. Open up the tennis courts. Take the lids off the basketball courts. Like, give me a break. It was stupid that those were closed in the first place, let alone, we're going to somehow, cling to closing them now. So those are things. The school is an interesting issue.
Yes.
For some people, it's cut and dry. On Twitter, the Jody Vances, the Bob Cronbauers of the world, they're just not going to send their kids back to school in May or June. Even if they have the option, they'll wait till the fall. Great. Yeah. Everyone has a choice. And if you have the ability to do that, that's great. Not everyone is in, who is it who tweeted this out? Camp Sourdough. Oh, I think Cronbauer called it. You're either in Camp Sourdough or you're in Camp Back to Work. Not everyone can live in Camp Sourdough, right? Like, for a number of businesses that are going to be reopening, folks are going to have to go back to work. Childcare is a huge piece of that puzzle. And schooling is obviously a big part of, providing that childcare, whether teachers like to call it that or not. It's true. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll use myself as an example. The legislature is going to be back in session in June, which we should also talk about. Yeah. But it's one thing for me to work from home when the House isn't sitting. I would prefer to be there if it is sitting. My wife works cleaning and prepping dinosaur fossils. Also not something you can do at home. Yeah. And so if for both of us to go back to work in June, going to need somebody to watch the little guy. And so his preschool, they will open apparently with limited numbers. We don't have the details yet, but if he's not one of those limited numbers, not both of us can do our jobs properly. So, I mean, some people do absolutely need the childcare to return to something remotely resembling normal in terms of their work.
Yeah, and I think Rob Fleming has an announcement today or tomorrow on this. The interesting thing is that Langley School District, which of course I follow so closely being from Langley, Prince George School District, they were sending out before the restart plan, the day before, notices to teachers saying start coming back in, changes are afoot. So clearly the school districts knew something was changing. But as you mentioned, those BCTF tweets indicate they did not know that their members were going to be brought back to work, in the actual building.
I think they've tried to dial it back since, and you never know in the heat of the moment. But it did look like there was a little minor disconnect there. Maybe they thought that they were all going to be back in their classrooms in a week or two. That's obviously not the case, but some of them will be soon enough, in a few weeks.
Yeah, and talking to a few teachers, they're concerned about being cycled through some of these classes and opening up exposures. Quebec had a case today of the daycare where I think 15 of the 25 kids have tested positive for COVID. Doesn't sound like, at least what I read, any of them are seriously ill, but we are going to have these outbreaks. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids in daycare in Quebec. One daycare having an outbreak shouldn't be surprising. It's bound to happen at some point, right? But, that is something that we're going to have to kind of gird ourselves for, I guess.
Well, and I think that's something that one of the reasons the provincial government has been so reluctant is that they know these things are coming. We know that as we reopen, there will be little mini outbreaks here, there, and everywhere. The whole point of flattening the curve was not to eradicate the virus. That's impossible. It's to spread out the infections over a longer period of time so we don't overwhelm the healthcare system. It does not mean nobody gets sick. And this is hard, and I don't want to sound like I don't care, but these things are going to happen, and until we have a virus or until enough of us have acquired it and we attain some herd immunity, this is what the world's going to look like for another year and a half or so.
Yeah, I think you're right. Other little questions. I think Bob Price, our Business Beat contributor, he brought up the fact of what's the difference between a pub and a bar? Pubs go in phase 2 and bars go in phase 3, but that doesn't really that's a good question. What is the difference between a pub and a bar? I'm sure there's probably a licensing thing. I imagine the way they're licensed, there's probably liquor policy being so convoluted in every jurisdiction.
Yeah, I wonder if they really mean, or what Bob and probably myself would call, the difference between a pub and a nightclub. But again, I don't know. And that's you've been enough bars, pubs, and nightclubs to know that it's not a binary either or. No,
exactly. So how will that go? You got your haircut booked?
You know what? You bring this up. My hair salon is closing.
No.
They sent out they're one of the small businesses that isn't going to make it. And this is sad because I really enjoyed going. It was a place in Victoria called The Hive. And the owner sent out an email to all their clients just saying we can't make this work. And they're going to try and find spots for all of their stylists, and they'll connect us with them when they find spots. But yeah, it is. There will be a lot of cases like this. There'll be a lot of businesses that just don't make it through the other side. And unfortunately, my salon is one of them. And I really enjoyed going there.
Yeah, well, they get allowed to reopen May 19th. My suspicion is those first couple of days will be slow as they try to get their feet. Yeah. And you're talking about maybe 8, 9, 10 days to try to get enough money in the bank to pay your rent again on June 1st. And for a lot of businesses, that's going to be impossible.
Yeah, I think that, not to speak for my salon, but I think that was one of the calculations they made where they couldn't make it work, and it was unfortunately, I don't want to use the word easier, but the only decision that made sense was to close permanently. That's
distressing.
It is.
It's distressing because that's someone's hopes and dreams. They built that up. They built a business. They built loyal enough for someone to come on a podcast and lament their loss, and through no fault of their own, it vanishes and they're set back, years worth of finances.
Well, and if you think about that, it's not just the salon, but they're in a larger building in downtown Victoria. That's rent that somehow now is just not going to ever materialize. As the spillover effects of all these things, we're only just beginning to grasp at. As some of these businesses close, they're going to stop paying rent, and for property owners and people who are trying to run buildings, this all gets really messy really fast.
Yeah, or as they close, but also as they self-limit clientele, the number of people they can process, that's going to slow them down. There's just not going to be that same kind of, this is not going to be a consumer-driven recovery. For one thing, so many consumers will be out of work. They won't want to spend or be frightened to spend. And second of all, the businesses aren't going to be set up to be able to take that huge influx of business.
That's right.
You're not going to be able to double staff chairs and stuff like that. It's going to be problematic from that point of view. I will say this though, my sister-in-law is a hairdresser, and she told me that within 3 hours she had 25 texts from different clients trying to get booked in for the 19th. So there you go. But here's the better way of doing it, Maclean. Just double your bubble to include your hairstylist.
I would venture to call her a friend, so you never know. It's possible.
Well, I have a sister-in-law, and that's what we did. So everything is hunky-dory. Museums, art galleries, and libraries.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, not all museums, art galleries, and libraries are created equal. So, I mean, I think everyone will have a different mental image.
Yeah.
For me, when you say museum, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the biggest museum in the province, the Royal BC. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. That said, there are some pretty close,
are you going to limit rooms to 50
in there.
people? Yeah, you're going to limit rooms to 50 people?
I guess. I mean, I don't know how else you do it.
Maclean,
but I mean,
Maclean, there's no tourists and there's no school groups coming across, so you probably could do it.
That's true. That's true. Actually, that's a really good point. I hadn't even thought of that. But I mean, that is literally the biggest one in the province when it comes to, you mentioned art galleries and libraries. There are some very small ones here too. Yeah. It's tricky. It's tricky to see how this is going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, the museum, that's interesting, the museum, because will you be allowed 50 in the room with the ship and 50 in the room with the mammoth and 50 in the room with the First Nations artifacts, or is it 50 in the whole building? These will be
50 in the whole building.
50
I
in the
mean,
whole
I don't
building.
think anyone knows. I don't think anyone knows, and it's going to be hard because not all the exhibits are created equal, and so there'll be especially. I mean, there's going to be a new exhibit on. This is going to sound like a plug on orcas in the fall. It's true, and I want to go see that. Yeah. And not everyone's going to want to go hang out with a mammoth when that's on.
Oh, I want to see that too. I'll come across and for the day, and I'll go with you, and we'll stay 6 feet apart. And
excellent.
We'll wander through. Okay, let's plan it. We'll plan a date on that. Museums also, though, very volunteer heavy, and I'm not sure what volunteerism is going to be like. And generally, the volunteerism is a terrible stereotype, but the docents who at least work at the Langley Museum are a little bit older, they have more time on their hands because they're retired. Mm-hmm. I do wonder how they'll deal with that. But it'll be nice to have libraries open. I mean, it was kind of crazy they were closed, but whatever.
Abundance of caution. The legislature is coming back.
Yes, you must be thrilled.
I kind of am. I miss the old rock pile. It's also nice to know that some people, and I'm going to give another shout out, I think it's 2 weeks in a row, to our press gallery president, Richard Zussman, sent out an email saying, look, everyone's going to have some concerns and frankly, a lot of ideas how we can manage this going back in. And so please fire away at me and I'll bring up everything. He's going to meet with the clerk. And it's good that they're thinking of this in advance because there's a lot of things that are going to have to be different.
You can't scrum. You can't.
Well, that was one of the things that I brought up with him is that we're going to need a big space where we can do this because, the hallways are pretty tight quarters. And I mean, if you've ever seen a scrum, it gets very claustrophobic very fast, not least because we have to leave space for people to walk by in the hallway. So some of the big halls, like the Hall of Honor, if you're familiar with the legislature, would seem obvious, but they're also public. Yeah. And so we don't know if it's going to be open to the public. There's a lot of questions like that. We
don't allow the public in the legislature anymore. We did before COVID. We're not going to do it during or after COVID.
Yeah. And even things like where those of us in the media are allowed to sit physically in the gallery to watch. We all kind of cluster along one bench, which we can't do now. But there's only so many spots we have available, and we can't sit on the wings unless you only want to see one side of the house.
Right.
So we're hopefully going to ask if we can sit on the opposite side, where we'd have full view of the speaker, but also both sides. Again, things we haven't thought of.
Yeah, those are good points. I wonder if every MLA will be in the house. You kind of think they're going to cycle.
I think they have to cycle. They're also very tight quarters. And I think if every MLA in the house, that would violate the 50 people rule in an enclosed space. So I think, I don't know this. I haven't talked to anyone. Yeah. I think it will be more than the emergency half-day session they did to pass the supply bill, where it was like 10 MLAs total. Right. But I don't think it'll be anything close to, full capacity of MLAs or staff.
Yeah. You're not going to see, they should not send Ralph Sultan into there.
No.
They should not send, and Ralph, for anyone watching, he's a 90-year-old, incredibly active and fit and wonderful for a 90-year-old, but 90.
But 90, yeah.
Carol James should only go in for very specific finance days. Given her Parkinson's diagnosis. So some of those people will self-eliminate, I think. But you're right. If you guys are going to have to go to pool reporters almost, because you can't have 15 of you in the press gallery and then only 35 legislators.
Yeah, I mean, we're
plus
all
Hansard,
fairly.
Plus clerk.
There are several locations where we work out of. The concern is going to be when we all congregate to, interview the premier or see Carol James or Andrew Wilkinson when they're coming out of their office, which is normal.
Yeah.
But that can't happen now, and so we need a space where we can talk to people. Be it there is a press theater but that's only for the government. If we want to talk to Adam Olson, Andrew Wilkinson, Darryl Plecas, we need somewhere else, and that is not an obvious place right now.
Yeah. All right. I suspect you'll be doing lots of interviews in the Rose Garden.
That is actually possibly, but the Rose Garden is actually also pretty confined in terms of space. Yeah. I think, there's always the option of doing it on the front steps or the front or back lawn, yeah. But then audio becomes a big problem. Yeah. So, there's a lot of things that a lot of people are going to have to think. A lot of people will come up with suggestions, and then someone else who works in things like audio or radio will say, no, we can't for this reason.
I'm sure Alan Mullen is all over this, Steve. Nothing to do. Okay. And then going forward, film industry, hotels, resorts, overnight camping maybe. That sounds like a summer thing. I guess the one thing I would caution people is, look, we know infection rates are going to go up. We're not going to be at 8 or 23 forever, or like the last 2 days. Just by virtue of doing this, it's going to creep up. It may even creep up into triple digits. That is not great. However, we need to keep in mind, what the actual metrics are that we're most concerned of: hospital and ICU visits,
yes,
and of course deaths. And there's going to be outbreaks in certain places. You're going to have to kind of disregard that as that's not a public infection issue. It was, the foolishness of that particular place. So, that's going on. I'll tell you one thing we're doing here at ICBA and our office. There have been people coming in and out of it. We have a very large office, about 16,000 square feet, and we have about 40 employees. We've been having people come in and out, between 2 and 6 people a day in this big cavernous space. But we started talking about with our staff, when do you want to come back? And what we're doing is making sure all those people who are working at home now can keep their monitors at home and their infrastructure at home, but also replicating it here at the office, making sure they have their monitors here they can plug into, so that maybe the most you're taking back and forth is a laptop rather than all of your equipment. This is important for two things, Maclean. Number one, it gets people into the action of making decisions as whether they want to come into the office or work at home. Either one works. But it also protects you for the future. If there is a second wave, and something happens in the fall, crazy with this virus, we can immediately go back to work at home. There's not even a switch to flip. It's just don't come in, right? We're going to do that. Mm-hmm. It also protects people who wake up with the sniffles. You wake up with the sniffles. You're supposed to stay home sick, but you're well enough to work normally. But you're not supposed to because you have the sniffles. You could still work at home and be protected and rest if you need or whatever. But you can still work through that symptom. These are the kind of things I think I suspect a lot of offices like ours are kind of processing and trying to work through, rather than automatic sick day. If you have the sniffles, you feel great. Otherwise, you just have a runny nose. No, we can make sure we still have the ability to have you work.
That's good, and I'm glad to hear you guys are doing just that. It's I think sick days is going to be one of those things that we have the hardest time adjusting with, because the premier talked about this yesterday, and I think he's right. Is that there was a culture everywhere of course you sort of soldier through unless you're really sick. You just kind of for lack of a better way of putting it, you man up and go in. Yeah. That is going to be different now, but that's also going to be challenging because what if you're someone who has seasonal allergies? What if you're somebody who has my wife gets migraines? Mm-hmm. That's not infectious, but boy, it can sure look like it because the person acts sick. We're still, I think, going to be relying a lot on personal judgment. Yeah. And there are going to be cases when people look like they shouldn't be in, but they're presenting no danger to anyone, and there's going to be a lot of pressure to stay home for them too. I'm also thinking, I've got a 5-year-old. I mean, the days when 5-year-olds don't have runny noses and the sniffles are few and far between,
Yes.
especially when they're all together. That's going to be really hard.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And kids are the funniest because they'll barf their guts out at 3 a.m. and at 7:30 they're eating Lucky Charms ready to go. And you're like, oh my God, that would have put me out for a week and a half. And, you know, for you, it's no problem. Maybe we wrap on this. There were 2 Horgans yesterday that I saw during that speech. And I think it's the classic struggle that people on his side of the spectrum feel. At times, the ideological Horgan came out. Climate change, reconciliation, the things that, important issues, no doubt, but the things that are like his bread and butter re-election issues, the reasons why he and his gang are in politics, right? Like the things they want to address. We got to deal with these. We can't, just forget all that and do only COVID. So there's that first kind of hints and reminders that, oh yeah, you have an ideological worldview that everyone should be unionized and everyone should, all employers are evil and, that is your little worldview. Okay. Good. It's nice to, it was almost comforting. There you are, John. I see you again, good. But there was also this, the plan is all about really personal responsibility. Individuals, not collectives, individuals acting and making the choices for them and their families. Dr. Bonnie mentioned, the question about, Binder Sagen, can I hug my mom on Mother's Day?
Yeah.
And John, sputtering like, I'd love to hug my mom. His mom passed away when this is a big thing, right? Like, of course you want to hug your mom on Mother's Day. But, reminding them, well, that's a personal choice. You have to weigh whether you feel like you've been sequestered enough and you're not a threat to her, and you have to, whether she's been sequestered enough and is not a threat to you. And that kind of personal choice, that is completely counterintuitive for the NDP union collective, we're all in this together world. And it'll be fun. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think there's going to be good days and bad days. I think there's going to be wings of their caucus that are going to disagree on this. It'll be interesting to see that friction continue. And I found that kind of intriguing.
You make a really good point because you can't give Binder's question about can she hug her mom. It was such a fantastic example because there's no way you can give advice on that without knowing, a lot about Binder and her mom, which I don't. But I mean, you can hug your mom if all the factors that go into it make it safe. But this is not general advice you can give. Is the point I'm going to make. Dr. Bonnie Henry is not in a position to tell Binder or myself or you or anyone else, any other individual that this situation is safe or not safe. Yeah. And the only way that we have been as successful as we have in BC is by trust, by giving British Columbians the information, good, consistent information, and, hoping and expecting that they will act responsibly. And I think overwhelmingly they have. And I hope that will continue. I don't see any reason why that's going to change. And you're right. You can't give collective advice. You can't give, this group is this and this group is that, at least not that I'm aware of. And they're going to have to continue to rely on individual trust and good judgment.
Yeah. And the funny thing about that is that erodes their re-election narrative because they can't go into the election next year and say, thanks to me and thanks to Adrian Dix and thanks to Dr. Bonnie and, we're the heroes of we were the heroes. We flattened the curve and we really did this and it was our wonderful management because we all know, well, businesses were already shutting down before you shut them down and people were already concerned and the Chinese community stepped up in January and February. We're self-isolating even before the rest of us really clued in as to what was going on. It was a collective responsibility. It was me staying at home with my wife and my kids and keeping them. It was you and your wife, making sure your little guy didn't come into any contact with. We're the heroes of the revolution, right? Like we're the heroes of the Great Isolation, not the politicians. And Dr. Bonnie, obviously, wonderful woman and has done an amazing job, especially in comparison to some of the other public health officers. But she's not on the ballot. So this is the kind of conflict that they'll have for the next year and a half, and it makes for
and they also know that
dynamic.
If they try and take ownership of the successes, then they'll also implicitly own any past or future failures that happen. And again, as we say, there will be some. And they may not even be failures. They may be expected outbreaks. But I mean, look at Lynn Valley, which, I'm not pointing out because of some failure on the part of the government. But I mean, if they're going to own the success of keeping infections low, then that's the way things work, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I mean, they were in power 2.5 years, so they can't pin PPE failures on the BC Liberals.
Yeah.
Like, there's lots of those types of things. All right, well, that's probably enough for today, I think. I
think so.
I should say, I feel upbeat. Like, I feel infused with energy. I'm excited to see folks come back to neighborhoods and whatnot, and stay 6 feet away from me. But I look forward to
you can
stopping
see
by your
them
shops.
now. It'll be nice.
Yeah, I look forward to stopping by your shops and purchasing things.
Yeah, no, me as well. I'm curious what Jody and George make of this. I'm looking forward to their show.
Yeah.
I think they're taping today, but we'll have a look.
Yeah, awesome. All right, see y'all next week.